Welcome to part 2 of communication in the context of neurodevelopmental diversity. Again, I'm Celina Cerf, a former speech and language pathologist and currently a neurodevelopmental fellow at Kennedy Krieger. Let's begin. The objectives for part 2 of this talk is to review ways that communication can break down. Communication breakdowns often occur when there are developmental differences. For example, if a child's receptive language is more advanced than their expressive language, this can be quite frustrating because they understand what the communication partner is saying better than how they're able to express. So this can just lead to a lot of frustration if they know what they want but have trouble being able to express themselves. And that is a very common phenomenon that can then lead to challenging behaviors, because sometimes children can unintentionally learn that engaging in a challenging behavior is the best way to get a reaction from another person. And even if our reaction or the communication partner's reaction is socially considered negative, it can still be very exciting and even rewarding to the child because they're getting a reaction and creating excitement from someone they really want to connect with, but don't necessarily have the tools to be able to make that connection. So what can we do? And through a lot of practice and figuring out methods that work best for your child is teaching functional means of communication. So one way to teach functional communication is through behavior analysis. It's important to think about behavior because language and behavior are very intricately linked. So a proactive way to think about ways to teach language or communication is by identifying motivators or reinforcers, and then pairing a communication symbol with that motivator. This, for example, could be a goldfish snack that the child really wants, and the symbol could be signing for more. Then it goes from shifting anticipating needs, so you know your child wants that goldfish, so you're going to provide it, shifting that to I can see what my child wants, but I'm going to create a learning opportunity for them by withholding that snack, potentially keeping it in view, and then prompting the request for more. On the other hand, let's say we now have a challenging behavior that we want to shape into a more functional communication method or means. So this is more of a retroactive approach. So we have a challenging behavior such as a tantrum or injurious behavior, and something that might be helpful is to think about what triggered the behavior. Was it the desire for a preferred item or activity, and then this became a learned behavior incidentally to make this request? Or is the task we're doing too challenging? Was a transition overwhelming? Or was this a communication breakdown that was just too challenging to communicate a desired item or activity? So the next step would be thinking about who was leading this interaction and then how to navigate it. It's important to think about who was leading the interaction because it will shape how it's navigated. So I would like to introduce the concept of child-led activities and adult-led activities. It's helpful to create boundaries between adult-led activities and child-led activities because we'll respond to challenging behaviors in different ways. For example, a great child-led activity is play. So that's when we're following the child's interests and actions to promote person-centered engagement. So getting on the floor with them, doing what they're doing to be able to have reciprocal interaction with them that they are leading. Versus adult-led activities, this is going back to creating those opportunities for communication and teaching potentially the ability to follow directions or those receptive language skills. This involves giving meaning to your words and creating, again, those opportunities to teach new skills. And if you're in an adult-led activity, such as teaching the sign for more for the more goldfish, then if a challenging behavior happens, you can help guide your child to uh, completing that task instead of giving them, well, it's a balance between giving them space to self-regulate, but also ensuring that they do complete the task, potentially with some prompting, some additional prompting or scaffolding, so that they're able to complete the task in an approachable way, and they eventually learn that the expectation was to sign for more. We meet them where they're at. That was maybe overwhelming, but we'll provide a visual or hand over hand, which I'll discuss that technique soon. And then they complete it, and then next time it'll be that much easier to start requesting. These are a couple behavioral techniques that can be helpful in teaching your child uh, to learn new skills in these adult-led times. So one being environmental arrangement, another is called the 3-point rule, and then finally we're going to touch briefly on screen time. Environmental arrangement is such an important concept because oftentimes we forget that we have the ability to control what is available in the environment for children to interact with. So this can include removing toys and objects that trigger challenging behaviors, which that often involves those screens, or creating opportunities for requesting, such as putting toys in clear bins or containers that are difficult for your child to open on their own, or providing a desired item with a missing piece, such as a cup without the straw, or a puzzle with a missing piece. And then the example we had just touched on for placing toys in clear bins, but this can significantly help set you up for success to create opportunities for communication, for requesting, and for engagement. Another important, I find very useful tool is called the 3-point rule. And this was a technique that was taught to me when I was an SLP or speech language pathologist by my SLP mentor, Philip Menard, who's an SLP practicing in Michigan. And so this 3-point rule allows for mapping meaning to communication. It helps building receptive language, and it also helps with those adult-led activities to help make them more approachable and scaffold the skill. So before we were using the example of signing more for goldfish. In this example, I have the direction to clap hands. So I will switch to that. So if you say clap hands, and then the child's just sitting there waiting, and then you can do a visual prompt, clap hands, and you wait. And then if there's still no response, hand over hand. So you put your hands around their hands and gently suggest to them physically having them clap their hands, and then yay, they clapped hands, great job. And then you slowly back away that support until they become more successful at doing it on their own. And a lot of times quickly kids will pick up with this series of support, and it's a way to help also prompt adults to provide fewer verbal instructions when teaching a skill. Oftentimes we tend to explain away new skills and our words become white noise. And so this is a nice way to concisely provide the direction, the visual prompt, and then hand over hand. Briefly, I'm going to touch on screen time. I know that it is very much a helpful tool, especially when it's incorporated with augmentative and alternative communication. I just wanted to take a moment to emphasize, if a skill is learned with the screen time, just try practicing it functionally with your child outside of the setting of the screen. So if a child is singing their ABCs, then practice with an ABC puzzle, singing the song, showing the letters. Similarly with a hello goodbye song, you can practice singing that song because now it's a learned routine, which is wonderful, and then singing that learned routine with people in their environment without the screen. So that can just be a nice stepping stone for a new skill. This sums up part 2 of the talk. I will see you guys in part 3.